For 8 years, the most feared man in Seoul could not speak. Every surgeon told him the same thing. Permanent damage. He spent millions chasing a cure. He flew to Seoul, Tokyo, Zurich. The world's most elite specialists studied his scans, and every one of them gave the same verdict. Irreversible. But in a crowded hospital hallway at 3 in the morning, a tired nurse noticed something every machine had missed. A tiny movement. A pebble under the skin of his throat. And what she discovered next would expose a lie that had stolen 8 years of a king's life. The corridor lights flickered as Yeo Joo-jung was rushed through the clinic during a security lockdown. His face had turned dark purple, his jaw clenched as he tried to force a command through a throat that refused to obey him. Bodyguards surrounded him. Doctors hovered nervously. But the nurse standing at the end of the hallway wasn't watching the guards. She was watching his neck. Oni Durgan had once been a battlefield medic. In Afghanistan, she had learned something that expensive hospitals often forgot. Machines can miss things. Eyes don't. And what she saw made her step forward. A rhythmic movement. Small. Subtle. About the size of a pebble. Right beside the nerve that controlled his voice. Yeo Joo-jung was a legend of the underworld. A Korean Mafia boss whose power stretched across cities and oceans. But 8 years earlier, a freak-choking incident had stolen the one thing a ruler needed most. His voice. Since that night, he had become a ghost. Doctors ran every test known to medicine. Millions were spent. Consultations cost $50,000 just to walk into the room. Yet every expert reached the same conclusion. Nothing could be done. And in the criminal world, a silent leader is a dying leader. His empire had begun to fracture. Enemies were watching, waiting, and the man who ruled everything was slowly losing control of it all. What he didn't know was that the truth wasn't hiding in a $1 million laboratory. It was hiding in the instincts of a nurse finishing a 16-hour shift. In the sterile hallway, 3 armed bodyguards reached for their jackets as Oni stepped forward. She pointed directly at his neck. "Stop." Her voice was calm. "Steady. You're all looking at the wrong place." The lead bodyguard's hand moved toward his holster. "Back away, nurse." But Oni didn't move. She looked directly into the frustrated dark eyes of the most dangerous man in the room. And for the first time, she didn't see a mafia boss. She saw a man trapped in silence. "If you let me touch that spot," she said quietly, "I think I can give you your voice back." The silence inside Yeo Joo-jung's penthouse office was heavier than the summer heat pressing against the glass windows. From the outside, he looked untouchable. A ruler. A man whose nod could end lives. But inside these walls, the silence was not power. It was a prison. He swallowed, and felt the familiar tightness flare in his throat. 8 years. 8 years since the night everything changed. His voice had faded from a hoarse rasp into nothing. He touched the side of his neck. The strange pulse was there again. Always there. A knock broke the silence. Minho entered. The Busan Syndicate missed their tribute again, boss. Joo-jung didn't look up. They say communication has been unclear. Minho hesitated. They want to hear the terms from you directly. Joo-jung's jaw tightened. He understood perfectly. Weakness. In the underworld, a leader who cannot speak is a lion that cannot roar. And lions that cannot roar eventually become prey. He grabbed a fountain pen and wrote 3 words. "Bring the doctor." Minho shifted uneasily. "Dr. Han says the Swiss scans show the same results. He recommends voice synthesizers." Joo-jung slammed his hand against the obsidian desk. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. He didn't want a machine. He wanted his voice. He wanted to feel air moving through his throat again. At 3 a.m., Central City Public Hospital smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Oni Durgan rubbed her eyes as she finished another chart. The waiting room was full of people the city had forgotten. People who didn't have $50,000 consultations. Only hope. Oni wasn't like most hospital staff. She had been a field medic with the 101st Airborne. Out there, diagnoses weren't made by machines. They were made by instinct. And instinct had saved lives. The double doors burst open. Men in black suits swept into the ER. Their presence froze the room. In the center of them stood Yeo Joo-jung. Oni didn't know his name, but she recognized authority when she saw it. The doctor beside him was pleading. The scans were clear, Mr. Yeo. Please return to the private wing. Joo-jung tried to speak. Nothing came out but a dry clicking breath. He grabbed his throat, and that was when Oni saw it. The small lump. Shifting. Moving when he tried to speak. Her eyes narrowed. Stop. The word cut through the room. Minho stepped forward. This is private. Oni pointed at the exact spot. Your doctor is looking at your brain and lungs. She tapped his throat. But he's missing the pebble. The private doctor scoffed. There is no pebble. Oni didn't even look at him. She looked only at the silent king in front of her. I've seen this before, she said quietly. It's not scarring. It's a ghost. And for the first time in 8 years, someone had given Yeo Joo-jung a reason to believe again. Absolutely miracle. Here's the remaining chapters, fully continued in the same polished high-retention style, with the same story flow, sharper pacing, cleaner suspense, and stronger voice narration rhythm. The air in the corridor changed. Not because anyone moved. Because everyone stopped breathing. Minho stood half a step in front of Yeo Joo-jung, one hand near his concealed weapon, eyes fixed on Oni. The hospital security guards hovered nearby, nervous and useless. In a place like this, nobody knew whether they were watching a medical emergency or the beginning of a war. Joo-jung lifted one hand. That was enough. His men froze. Oni stepped closer. He was taller than her by more than a head, broad-shouldered, severe, wrapped in a black suit that looked more expensive than the entire hallway around him. But none of that mattered to her. She had worked in places where men bled out in dust while explosions shook the ground. Fear had lost its power over her years ago. The private doctor recovered first. You think you know better than the chief of otolaryngology at Seoul National? He snapped. This man has chronic laryngeal fibrosis. You are interfering in a condition you clearly do not understand. Oni turned to him slowly. I understand enough to know you treated the result and ignored the cause. The doctor scoffed. Oni pointed again to the side of Joo-jung's throat. Watch what happens when he tries to force sound. That pulse is wrong. That movement is wrong. This is not dead tissue. Something is physically pressing the nerve. Joo-jung narrowed his eyes. For a second, the hallway disappeared for him. The guards, the doctor, the lights, the noise. All of it faded under one impossible question. What if she was right? He reached for her wrist. Minho stepped forward at once. Boss, no. But Joo-jung's eyes cut toward him, cold and final. Stop. Minho obeyed. Oni let Joo-jung guide her hand to his neck. His skin was hot. The muscles beneath it were tight with pain and years of frustration. She shifted her thumb just below his jawline and pressed into the tissue. There, she said. Joo-jung jerked. Not from pain alone. From recognition. He felt it. A small resistance. A hard little shape where there should have been none. His eyes widened. For one brief second, the Emperor's mask cracked, and what stood in front of Oni was not a legend, not a criminal king, but a man who had just felt hope with his own body. Oni lowered her voice. If that fragment shifts the wrong way, the damage won't stop at your voice. Joo-jung stared at her. You could lose movement. Then the emergency alarm exploded overhead. A harsh mechanical voice broke across the intercom. Code Silver. Code Silver. Security breach in lower levels. The hallway erupted. Bodyguards moved instantly, closing around Joo-jung in a hard wall of black suits and drawn weapons. Nurses scattered. A child in the waiting area started crying. The red alarm lights began to flash, bathing the corridor in warning and panic. And in the middle of all of it stood one exhausted nurse, one silent king, and one lie that was about to come apart. The red emergency lights pulsed across the corridor like a heartbeat. But for Yeo Joo-jung, time had already slipped backward. 8 years earlier, he had been seated at the head of a banquet table in Busan Harbor, one hand around a crystal glass, the room warm with money, loyalty, and celebration. The deal that night had been one of the biggest of his life. Men who feared him had laughed when he laughed. Men who envied him had toasted when he raised his hand. Then he bit down. Then he choked. A shard of bone and gristle lodged deep in his throat. The room had gone from celebration to chaos in seconds. He remembered clawing at his neck. Remembered the heat. The pressure. The blur of faces leaning over him. remembered the terror of suffocating in front of men who expected him to be indestructible. When he woke up in his private medical suite, the pain had dulled, but his voice had changed. At first it was a torn rasp, then a broken whisper, then almost nothing. Dr. Han had stood over him with calm eyes and expensive glasses, speaking in that grave, measured tone men use when they want bad news to sound unavoidable. The swelling was severe. There was nerve compromise. You survived, boss. That is the important thing. But the damage is permanent. Permanent. That word had ruled the next 8 years of his life. Millions disappeared into treatments. Specialists were flown in from Europe, America, Japan. Every one of them reviewed Han's records first. Every one of them repeated the same verdict. Irreversible. Now, back in the flashing corridor, Joo-jung looked at Han again. And for the first time, he saw something he had never noticed before. Not concern. Fear. Han wasn't afraid of the code silver. He was afraid of Oni. Boss, we have to leave now, Han shouted over the alarm. This woman is reckless. The lockdown is dangerous. We need to get you back to the private facility. He reached for Joo-jung's arm. Oni stepped between them. No. Han glared at her. You have no authority here. And you have no answer for what's in his neck. She turned to Joo-jung. That lump isn't scar tissue. It isn't random swelling. It feels calcified. Old. Hard. Small enough to hide. Big enough to keep pressing the nerve every time he tries to speak. Han's face drained. Oni saw it and pressed harder. It didn't get there yesterday. It's been there from the start. The bodyguards shifted. Joo-jung did not move. Oni's eyes stayed on Han. You didn't miss it, she said. You left it there. Silence. Even with the alarm blaring overhead, silence somehow filled the space between those words. Han stumbled back a step. I can explain. Joo-jung turned his head slowly. His men felt the shift before anyone spoke. The energy around him changed. The patience that had held the room together snapped into something much colder. Han raised both hands. The surgery risk was high. I made a clinical judgment. I protected you. No one believed him. Least of all Joo-jung. He looked at the nearest treatment room. Then at Oni. Then he pointed. The order was simple. Now. Oni nodded once. Min-ho, she said, her voice like steel, lock the door. Nobody comes in. Not him. Not anybody. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it before that nerve takes any more pressure. Joo-jung stepped toward the treatment room without hesitation. Because after 8 years of silence, a stranger had just told him the truth. And he was done living inside someone else's lie. The treatment room door slammed shut behind them. Outside, the hospital still throbbed with the panic of the code silver. Distant footsteps pounded the hall. Alarms echoed through metal and tile. But inside that small room, everything narrowed down to breath, hands, and nerve. Min-ho stood by the door like a wall. Dr. Han was shoved into the far corner, pale, sweating, shaking. Oni moved fast. Not rushed. Precise. She cleared a tray, sterilized what she could, checked the penlight, found forceps, gauze, alcohol, gloves. It wasn't a surgical suite. It wasn't even close. But she had worked in worse places with less time and less certainty. Han found his voice first. This is madness, he said. She's a public ward nurse. If she slips, if she damages the nerve, he could lose swallowing function entirely. Oni ignored him. Joo-jung sat on the edge of the exam table, eyes fixed on her. He unbuttoned the top of his shirt, then the next, exposing the line of his throat. His expression never changed, but his fingers gripped the table hard enough to whiten at the knuckles. Oni stepped between his knees and looked him in the eye. I need you still. He held her gaze. It will feel like choking again. Your body is going to panic. Do not fight me. He gave one short nod. That was all. Han lunged for the door. I'm calling the police. This is criminal. Min-ho stopped him with one arm and shoved him back against the wall. The boss is busy. Oni placed 2 fingers against the side of Joo-jung's neck and found the spot again. There. The hard resistance. The hidden pressure point. She pressed. Joo-jung's body reacted instantly. His airway tightened. His face darkened. His eyes flared with the raw instinct to pull away. But he didn't move. Oni adjusted her thumb, hooked beneath the cartilage, and forced the fragment into position. Almost there, she whispered. Her other hand lifted the forceps. She was not thinking about who he was. Not about what he controlled. Not about how many armed men were outside this door. She was thinking in angles. Depth. Pressure. Breathing. Nerve location. She made the smallest opening she could manage. Joo-jung's chest strained. A soundless gasp caught in his throat. Sweat broke across his forehead. The muscles in his neck stood out sharply beneath her hand. Han turned his face away. He knew what was coming. Oni felt the fragment shift. A tiny click. Then contact. Then grip. She pulled. The piece came free with a soft resistance that made the whole room freeze. It was small. Jagged. Yellow-gray. No larger than a grain of rice. But it had stolen 8 years. She dropped it into the metal tray. Clink. The sound was tiny. It landed like thunder. Joo-jung folded forward, dragging in air with a long, shaking inhale that seemed to come from the bottom of his lungs. His whole body shuddered once, then again. He coughed. Hard. Wet. Real. Oni stepped back half a pace, eyes locked on him. The room went silent. Han stared at the tray like he was looking at a death sentence. Oni swallowed. Try. Joo-jung looked up slowly. His eyes were wet. His throat worked once. Twice. The muscles moved differently now. Freer. As if something deep inside had finally stopped fighting him. He opened his mouth. Nothing. Then again. A sound came out. Small. Broken. Raw. But sound. He swallowed and pushed once more. Oni. The word scraped out rough and low. But it was there. His voice. Not a machine. Not a note on paper. Not a gesture. His. Dr. Han's knees nearly gave out in the corner. Joo-jung did not look at him. He looked only at the woman in faded scrubs standing under the cheap fluorescent light. The woman who had seen what the world's most expensive experts had either missed or hidden. And for the first time in 8 years, the silent emperor had spoken. No one moved for a full second. Maybe 2. The room seemed stunned by what had just happened. Yeo Joo-jung touched his own throat as if he did not trust it yet. His fingers pressed lightly against the bandaged area. His chest rose and fell in deep, uneven breaths. He could feel vibration where there had only been emptiness. Air now moved through him with purpose. Oni washed his face, not celebrating yet. She had learned long ago that miracles still needed monitoring. Again, she said softly. Joo-jung lifted his eyes to hers. He tried. 8. The sound cracked. He stopped, swallowed, and pushed more carefully this time. Oni. Clearer. Still rough. Still scarred by years of disuse. But stronger. A muscle in Minho's face twitched. It was the closest he ever came to open emotion. He stared at his boss like he had just watched the dead rise. Han did not stare at Joo-jung. He stared at the tray. At the fragment. At proof. At the little piece of calcified betrayal that had just destroyed the safest lie of his career. Joo-jung slid off the exam table. He stood slowly, but once he was upright, something came back into him all at once. His shoulders settled. His spine straightened. The desperate patient disappeared. The ruler returned. He adjusted his shirt collar with measured fingers. Then he looked at Han. The doctor's lips trembled. Boss, Han said weakly, please. Listen to me. Joo-jung took one step toward him. The room seemed to shrink around that step. Han pressed himself flat against the wall. You kept me alive, Joo-jung said, his voice still low and frayed. So you could keep me weak. Each word came out a little steadier. A little sharper. Han shook his head frantically. The risk was real. I was managing the condition. I was protecting the empire from instability. No, Joo-jung said. His eyes never left Han's. You were profiting from my silence. Han opened his mouth again, but no defense came out that could survive the metal tray lying 2 feet away. Oni took off her gloves and set them down carefully. The adrenaline was beginning to leave her body now, and with it came the tremor in her hands. She hid it as best she could. Joo-jung noticed anyway. He turned to her. All the severity in his face shifted, not into softness exactly, but into something quieter. Something human. You did what they could not. Oni exhaled. I did what they refused to. That landed. Because both of them knew that was the truth. The alarm outside still screamed. The crisis outside the door still existed. But inside this room, one crisis had ended, and another had begun. Because a man who had been forced into silence for 8 years had just gotten his voice back. And now the world that had adjusted itself around that silence was about to pay for it. Joo-jung cleared his throat once. The sound was rough, metallic, unfamiliar. Then he looked at Min-ho. Phone. Min-ho moved at once, pulling a secure satellite phone from inside his jacket and placing it in his boss's hand without a word. Han's eyes widened. He knew exactly who Joo-jung would call first. The Busan Syndicate had been pushing harder every month, testing boundaries, delaying tribute, speaking with just enough disrespect to measure how much weakness silence had created. Now they were about to get their answer. Min-ho dialed and set the call to speaker. One ring, then another, then a smug male voice answered. Min-ho, tell your boss that if he wants his money, he can come ask for it himself. Since he can't speak, we're done pretending to be afraid. No one in the room moved. Joo-jung lifted the phone. His face became completely still. I am asking myself. The line went dead silent. On the other end, whatever confidence had existed shattered instantly. A sharp inhale crackled through the speaker. Boss. Joo-jung's voice was still gravel dragged over stone, but every syllable carried command. You have 1 hour to deliver what you owe. Silence. And 1 more hour to decide which lieutenant you will offer for insulting my house. The man on the other end was breathing too fast now. Boss, I didn't know. We were told. Joo-jung cut him off. If you are late, I will come to the docks myself. He leaned slightly closer to the phone. And tonight, I have plenty to say. He ended the call. No flourish. No anger. Just certainty. Min-ho took the phone back, and for the first time in years, relief broke through his discipline. The message will spread in minutes, he said. Joo-jung nodded once. Then he turned back to Han. The doctor looked less like a respected specialist now, and more like a man watching the floor disappear beneath him. 8 years, Joo-jung said. Han's mouth trembled. 8 years of consultations. 8 years of reports. 8 years of pretending nothing could be done. Boss, please. 8 years of taking from me. Han started crying before he realized he was doing it. I saved you that night. Joo-jung took another step. No. His voice dropped lower. You caged me. He looked toward Min-ho. Take him. Han's head snapped up. Boss, no. Please, I can repay everything. You will repay everything, Joo-jung said. Every record. Every account. Every lie. Then his eyes hardened fully. And after that, you will learn what it means to be ignored. Min-ho gave a short signal. 2 guards entered, seized Han, and dragged him toward the door. His protests rose, broke, and disappeared into the flashing red hallway outside. The door shut again. Silence returned. Oni leaned one hand against the counter. Only now was the weight of what she had done beginning to hit her. The procedure, the pressure, the risk, the fact that she had cut into the throat of one of the most powerful men in Seoul with emergency room tools during a lockdown. Joo-jung saw the tremor in her shoulders. He crossed the room slowly. When he spoke again, the boss was still there. But behind the boss stood something else. Gratitude. Real and unguarded. You saved more than my voice. Oni let out a tired breath. I'm a nurse. I saw a patient. Joo-jung reached inside his jacket. He pulled out the pen he had used for years to write the words he could no longer say. Heavy. Black lacquer. Gold trim worn smooth where his fingers had held it. He placed it in her hand. This is the last thing I used in silence. Oni looked down at it. Keep it. She looked back up. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because when the world hears me again, it will know who gave me back the right to speak. By the time the code silver began to settle, the hospital had split into 2 worlds. One was public. Police officers in the lobby. Security reports. Administrators whispering. Staff pretending to return to routine while still glancing over their shoulders. The other world was private. Closed doors. Seized files. Urgent phone calls. People in expensive suits arriving without checking in. Oni was placed in a holding office off the administrative wing. No anger. No shouting. That almost made it worse. A supervisor took her badge. Another avoided her eyes while explaining protocol. Unauthorized intervention. High-profile patient. Review pending. She sat on a hard plastic chair with the gold-trimmed pen hidden in her scrub pocket and stared at the floor. Now that the adrenaline was gone, exhaustion crashed into her all at once. The reality of it hit next. She could lose her job, her license, everything she had built. Across the hall, the atmosphere was very different. Joo-jung sat in the hospital director's office while Min-ho and two forensic accountants went through years of digital records at speed. Wire transfers, shell companies, lab invoices, falsified reports, experimental therapies billed at impossible rates. The numbers kept rising. The pattern was undeniable. Dr. Han had not simply prolonged treatment. He had built a business around keeping the most powerful man in the city broken. The hospital director, Dr. Sterling, stood near the wall sweating through his shirt. "We had no idea," he said. Han came with exceptional credentials. His documentation was complete. Joo-jung's hand rested lightly against the bandage on his neck. When he spoke now, the words came smoother than before. Documentation is only useful when truth is inside it. Sterling swallowed. "Mr. Yeo, about the nurse." Joo-jung looked at him. Sterling nearly stopped breathing. "There are procedures. She performed an invasive act without authorization. The board will have concerns." Joo-jung stood. The whole room seemed to tilt around that movement. A woman on a 16-hour shift saw in seconds what your specialists missed for 8 years. Sterling said nothing. She looked at the patient. Not the prestige. Not the paperwork. The patient. Sterling tried again. "The hospital cannot simply ignore policy." Joo-jung stepped closer to the desk. "You will not dismiss her." Sterling blinked. "You will not suspend her. You will not bury this to protect your reputation. And if I hear her name spoken in this building with anything less than respect, I will purchase this hospital and remove every person who helped protect that fraud." The room went completely still. Min-ho turned from the laptop. "The accounts tie back to Han directly. Offshore holdings. Shell corporations. Private lab ownership. We have enough." Joo-jung nodded. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in his chest all night. "My son." Min-ho checked his phone. "He's awake." Something shifted in Joo-jung's face. Not weakness. Something rarer. Tenderness. Min-ho continued, more quietly. "He asked if you were all right." Joo-jung looked away for a moment, mastering himself. Then he walked out into the hallway. At the far end, 2 security guards were escorting Oni toward the exit. Her shoulders were straight, but he could see the exhaustion in the way she moved. "Oni." He said her name across the corridor, fully, clearly, with the strength of his own voice. She stopped. The guard stopped too. Everyone in the hallway turned. Oni looked at him like she had been struck still. He walked toward her. "Your shift isn't over." One of the guards began to speak, then thought better of it. Joo-jung reached her and lowered his voice. "My people found the records. Every lie, every payment." Oni held his gaze. And I am not going to rebuild in silence." He extended his hand. "You gave me back my voice." His eyes did not leave hers. "Now help me make sure it is used well." After the longest second of the night, Oni placed her hand in his. Not because he was powerful, because he meant it. Dawn arrived slowly over Seoul. The city lightened from black to blue to gold, and by sunrise the hospital no longer felt like the same building. The red emergency lights were gone. The sirens had stopped. The hallways were quieter now, but not empty. News had already begun to spread. Staff moved differently. Administrators spoke more carefully. People who had ignored Oni the night before now looked at her with a stunned kind of respect. At the executive lobby window, Yeo Joo-jung stood in a dark coat, looking out over the waking city. Beside him stood Oni, still in wrinkled scrubs, hair slightly loosened, face marked by exhaustion, shock, and the strange stillness that comes after a life changes too fast to process. Behind them, the collapse had already begun. Dr. Han's accounts were frozen by morning. His clinics were under review. The reports he had used to justify years of treatment were being audited line by line. The story was no longer a secret. A doctor had hidden the cure. A nurse had found it. And the man at the center of it all could finally speak for himself. Joo-jung broke the silence. "My son woke up an hour ago." His voice still had rough edges, but now those edges sounded lived in rather than broken. Oni turned toward him. He kept looking out at the skyline. "For 8 years," he said, I hugged him in silence. His throat tightened slightly, but he kept going. This morning I said his name. That alone nearly undid her. He let out a breath and continued. I told him I was proud of him. The next words came quieter. I told him I loved him. Oni looked away toward the window because suddenly the room felt too full. That matters more than everything else, she said. He finally turned to her. No. She blinked. It matters most, he said. But not more than everything. He reached to the nearby table and picked up a folder. The board met before sunrise. Oni frowned. The board. They reversed every disciplinary action. Publicly. She stared at him. He held the folder out to her. Inside were foundation papers, funding commitments, executive signatures, and a title page. The Durgan Yeo Institute for Investigative Medicine. Oni looked from the page to him. What is this? A place that looks where others don't, he said. A place for rare cases, ignored symptoms, hidden causes. A place built for patients who are dismissed because their truth is inconvenient or unprofitable. She kept staring. You spent one night changing my life, he said. I intend to spend far longer making sure your gift is never buried in a hallway again. Her fingers tightened around the folder. I'm just a nurse. His answer came immediately. You were never just anything. That landed deeper than he knew. For years she had worked until her bones ached, going unseen in overcrowded wards, trusting instinct in a world that worshipped titles. Last night she had risked everything on what she knew in her hands and her gut. Now the world had no choice but to see her. Hospital staff had gathered quietly along the corridor by then. Not close enough to intrude. Close enough to witness. Joo-jung looked toward the doors. The city beyond them was awake now. His empire was awake too, waiting to hear from the man they thought had been reduced to silence forever. He smiled slightly. There was still roughness in his voice when he spoke, but now it sounded like power returning home. There is a great deal I need to say. Oni smiled back, tired and real. Then say it. He looked at her. And stand with me. She slipped the gold-trimmed pen deeper into her pocket and held the folder against her side. Yes, she said. But only if you promise one thing. His brow lifted. She gave him the first light smile of the morning. No more ignoring symptoms. For the first time that night, he laughed. It was low, hoarse, new, but it was laughter. And for a moment, the staff in the corridor smiled too, because there is something unforgettable about hearing joy where there used to be silence. The doors opened. Morning light spilled across the floor. And Yeo Joo-jung walked into the day not as a myth, not as a ghost, not as a king trapped inside his own body, but as a man with his voice restored, his enemy exposed, his son finally hearing the words he had waited years to hear, and a nurse beside him who had seen the truth when no one else would.